and how much of a highly touted prospect Monroe really was. Back in high school at Louisiana, he was named Louisiana Mr. Basketball twice, in 2007 and 2008. In the '08 graduating class, he was labeled as a 5-star recruit by Rivals.com and the #1 power forward in the entire nation. Ultimately, Monroe chose Georgetown. In his 2 years there, he won the Big East Rookie of the Year and the Pete Newell Award, rewarded to the best big man in college. Monroe would ride this wave of momentum straight into the NBA draft, where he got selected by the 7th pick by the Detroit Pistons in 2010. Before we get into this career, I gotta say that he had one of the best, most accurate scouting reports I've ever seen. This was written by Paul Banks of NBC Chicago and David Kay of the Sports Bank. They listed his strengths here: versatile, great handles, good footwork, outstanding passer, nice touch on his jumper, good basketball IQ. These are all the things that Monroe became known for in the NBA. These strengths were certainly accurate, and he proved it in his first few seasons. Then we see his weaknesses. Average but not great athlete, lacks the physical killer instinct, defers to his teammates, tends to get pushed around, must be more consistent with his outside shot. These weaknesses are also spot on. However, the issue was, throughout his NBA career, he has never been able to fix any of these weaknesses. Instead, they were a hindrance to him and a burden to every team he's been on. Starting off his career in Detroit in 2010, they were starting their rebuild. Previously, from 2003 to 2008, they would make it to at least the conference finals in 6 consecutive seasons, including 2 finals appearances and 1 championship. However, by 2009, they were getting older and blew up their team. Monroe was their first lottery pick in this new era, and he carried a lot of weight, a lot of expectations to lead this rebuild, and hopefully bring the Pistons back to the promised land. By his sophomore season, he quickly became the team's leading scorer and leading rebounder. While his post-scoring and passing caught the attention of NBA fans, his offensive rebounding was pretty ridiculous, averaging nearly 4 offensive boards per game in just 31 minutes. Unfortunately, through his years in Detroit, this rebuild became a complete failure. Part of it has to do with Monroe himself. His development stagnated, and his lack of improvement was starting to alarm the fans. All the weaknesses that were mentioned earlier in his scouting report, they were put in the spotlight. But it wasn't just Monroe himself. The Pistons organization did a pitiful job of building the roster around him, and these problems centered around 2 major acquisitions. In 2012, the Pistons drafted Andre Drummond with the 9th pick. Now, Drummond was not a bad pick at that spot, but he was a bad fit for this team. In theory, his energetic, athletic playstyle and rebounding should fit alongside Monroe's rugged, calculated game pretty well. That's what Pistons president Joe Dumars expected. Then, in the 2013 offseason, the Pistons made one of the worst signings in NBA history: the acquisition of Josh Smith on a 4-year, $54 million contract. Even at the time, it was seen very unfavorably by almost everyone. Over his 9 years in Atlanta, he's had his ups and downs, flashes of brilliance, but also moments of utter stupidity. A somewhat athletic defender who can kinda play multiple positions, and perhaps he could cover Monroe's slow-footed defense. At least that was supposed to happen. At times, he got flack for taking too many jump shots and being completely lackadaisical. But don't worry, that's not gonna happen in Detroit, right? Well, it turns out this lineup of Monroe, Drummond, and Smith, plus Brandon Jennings and Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, they became the original death lineup. And by that, I mean people prefer to die than to watch them. The 2013-14 season saw this experiment explode in their face. Theoretically, Smith and Drummond were supposed to be good additions, but in reality, they were the worst fit you could ask for. This front court trio had zero spacing whatsoever. This also forced Monroe to play power forward instead of his natural position at center. So defensively, he matched up terribly in a league that was going small, and a lot of power forwards were simply too quick for him to guard. Josh Smith took the entire year off on defense, and on offense, he jacked up 16 shots per game. He registered a 46% true shooting percentage, the worst percentage out of any player in the NBA that season who took at least 15 shots a game. Not to mention, neither Monroe nor Drummond were capable shooters either. So you had three guys just clogging up the paint. As a result, they won just 29 games, finishing bottom 5 in defensive rating and bottom 10 in offense. The Pistons could not recover from this horrendous streak of bad signings, and eventually decided not to re-sign Monroe. In his 5 seasons in Detroit, they did not make a single playoff appearance. So in the 2015 offseason, he signed with the Milwaukee Bucks. Now, around this time, the Bucks were on the rise as they made the playoffs in the previous season. However, it was here when everyone started to realize that maybe Monroe was the problem all along. His addition was supposed to push them over the top, but instead they won 8 fewer games than the year before. All of the on-off numbers pointed to the Bucks being worse with Monroe on the floor. In the previous 2014-15 season, the Bucks were 4th in the entire league in defensive rating, with Zaza Pachulia and Larry Sanders taking turns being the starting center. In 2015-16 though, they dropped all the way down to 23rd, with Monroe as the new center. With him on the court, Milwaukee allowed 109.2 points per 100 possessions. His defensive box plus-minus rating was only 0.2 and his block rate was only 2.5%. That's god-awful for a center. As a result, coach Jason Kidd was prompted to make a hard decision. Despite being paid $17 million a year, Monroe would now permanently come off the bench after that horrendous season. It was quite sad because you rarely ever see big-name free agents go to Milwaukee in the first place. Initially, Bucks fans were excited for the first time in a long time. It just didn't work out. In a detailed article by Andrew Snyder on Hoops Habit, he stated, Monroe was never going to be a good fit for Jason Kidd's aggressive defensive scheme that requires the center to harass the lead ball handler in pick-and-roll sets. The system requires quick decisions regarding when to trap, when to switch pick-and-rolls, and good communication. Monroe isn't a bad player, he just doesn't make sense in Milwaukee. He's obviously very good offensively. In a different era, Monroe might have been a star, but the game has changed. In the next 2 years, he would play for 4 different teams, mainly as a bench warmer. And before you knew it, he was gone, out of the NBA. The fall of Greg Monroe should be a lesson for front offices around the league. He came into the NBA during a time when the game was evolving. The value of a slow-footed post-up scorer was rapidly decreasing, as teams now favored faster, quicker big men who can shoot and defend smaller guys in the pick and roll. Monroe could not do any of this effectively. Maybe if he played in a different era, it would have been another story. Maybe one day his game will change and he'll be back in the NBA. Who knows? Thank you everybody so much for watching. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section about Greg Monroe. Do you think there's a chance he could come back? I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and as always,